Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Film Family. Thank you for tuning in. Today, we're going to be talking about the new movie Hustlers, starring J-Lo and Cardi B, they said, but I mean, you know, what are your thoughts? And it's hard for us. I'm going to be honest. I feel like it's hard for us to review a movie like this because this is not a movie that's orientated towards us. So let's try to be as fair as possible here.
Yeah.
BG.
Yeah, it was a pretty good movie. It's obviously like I think a movie that I didn't necessarily know what it was going to be about for the entire runtime because the movie does kind of transition a bit through different time periods, and it does what most movies do based upon something that happened in the past. Where they'll start with somebody at the end when they're older talking about the event and kind of interweave those two. But I thought, as far as a movie goes about this premise, it was actually pretty good. It was relatively interesting. I think the coolest thing was the very first shot of the movie, which was a tracking shot. It starts in the room and then it goes through the club and everything. And that was like probably like 2 or 3 minutes. So that was really impressive, actually.
Yeah. Definitely this movie, I mean, it was a good movie. I liked it in certain ways, but then in certain ways I didn't like it. We'll discuss in that way. But it also starred Constant Wu. From Crazy Rich Asians, and
Yeah, see, I didn't see
Julia
that, but people told me she was great.
Yeah, Julia Stiles was in it as well, and the cast was pretty solid in that way. I just, for me, the main problems I had with it was based on a true story,
Which I didn't know until the end, by the way.
It said it in the movie.
I showed up late. So full
there you
disclosure, I didn't see that first scene.
I was gonna say, that's like the first
You seem
title
a little
card.
confused.
I was like, wait a minute. That's a nice twist in for you.
Yeah.
It was based on some article or something, and
Yeah.
for me, visually there were certain shots that I was like, wow, that's a really cool shot, and there's a point in the movie where the audio cut out, like for an effect.
Once the interview ended.
Yeah, that was a
she
cool
canceled
effect.
the recording. Yeah, I really like that.
Someone in our audience.
Yeah.
What did he yell?
Did I just go deaf?
Yeah, he goes, did I just go? I kid you not. This
I
guy
think
yelled
they were-
out,
I think
did
he
I
was
just go
joking.
deaf? And made it very interesting because I was like, but it was obviously an effect, but J-Lo did a really good job in my opinion. Like, I'm very critical on her. I actually know her. Not know her. Not,
Yeah.
Let's
But
get
you've met her.
I've met her many times, and her acting's on point. She's because I had heard Oscar buzz and stuff like that, so I was very critical. Okay, show me what this is. Is this hype? But she did a really good job, in my opinion.
I thought she like carried herself well, and she was like an important figure in the movie because she was very much like manipulative, but it also seemed like she actually did care about her girls, and so that made her an interesting character in the movie, and she was sort of like the thing which everything else in the movie revolved around. So I thought that was actually pretty interesting.
Me personally, I wasn't excited to see this movie.
Yeah.
Because again, I would recommend seeing it if you're going out with your female friends, and you guys are going out for girls' night out. 100% go see that. But it's not a movie that's for us.
Yeah.
As far as J-Lo goes, I think I agree. She did a very solid job acting, and so did Miss Wu. What's her name? Constance?
Constant Wu.
Yeah, and some scenes I felt like they didn't have enough, but then the emotional scenes where like the cameras kind of frame them dead on, and you see like tears kind of coming out nicely. It put together very nicely.
Yeah, what I liked about it was it showed like at certain points they were very strong women, but then at other times they were very vulnerable.
Yeah,
and that's a big range to go with. Sometimes you just play the strong woman. And it's like I don't care what happens, but with both Constance and J-Lo or Jennifer Lopez, it's like you see that there are little chinks in the armor in terms of like that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say one of the things that I thought was probably just one of my main gripes with the movie was that once they started their whole scheme and like they were doing it, then it stopped because they kind of got held up, and then they got like the new people. It kind of repeated that like filming again, and like I'm not gonna say that it was like unique at the beginning, but it felt like it was a cool way to shoot everything, just showing them constantly like every night having to kind of do the same process and the different ways that they evolved, like, and they found out better ways to do it, which was relatively interesting. But showing that happen again just with new people, I don't know, I felt like that necessarily just that was like probably 4 or 5 minutes in the movie that could have just been kind of cut out, or just like shortened a little bit.
And from an ethical standpoint, I personally hated, and it's hard to talk about ethical standpoint. And it's a movie about strippers, but I didn't like the fur coat, man. You know how many chinchillas you got to kill for that fur coat? It was just like, and then they're
I thought you were gonna say something else.
Yeah,
I mean, for me, the middle part kind of dragged in certain things because, as you said, there's a lot of repetition. The first part I liked because it was like a new introduction, and you're seeing it through, the eyes of a new person that's there in terms of she's getting introduced to all these people. And so I always love those kind of stories. But then, as you said, once it became a scheme thing, it kind of it took a different direction. I wasn't on board completely, even though it's a true story.
A big part was like Ramona, who Jennifer Lopez plays. She was kind of this maternal figure to everybody, but she also seemed to lack a little bit less of a moral compass in them because she had been in the game longer. So for her, it was a little less important about the ethical kind of implications within it, and more about just getting the money and like financially supporting themselves. Because to her, like I was saying, like a lot of it in a way is that they're her daughters or her sisters, and her sister. That's what she says, and that they're taking care of themselves however they can do it. And she clearly has a little more of a cynical outlook because there's a couple of times where she's like, that money's getting wasted anyway. She said like one time it's from the fireman's retirement fund, which I thought was interesting. So it's a big part for her is that she just doesn't think it's as big of a deal as the other girls do. And so I thought that was an interesting part of her character.
I was not expecting to see Keke Palmer in this movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I did not know I didn't know much about the movie, obviously, before going into it. But it's always interesting seeing, like, for lack of a better term, but this is what she is, like a Disney star, a child star kind of coming into a different movie. And I think she's actually done much better than other Disney stars has as a track record.
She's been in other,
we
just don't
better
watch
stuff. We just haven't watched it. But I think she did a really good job in this.
Yeah, she's solid. Yeah.
I liked the blonde girl. I don't remember her name, but she kept throwing up.
Oh,
who always got sick. I thought that was
Lily Reinhardt.
Okay, I thought she had a nice little comedic effect there.
Yeah. And then the one other thing is like, I think the final like 5 minutes or so of the movie when it's talking about like Ramona, I thought was a good way to end the movie because I was kind of curious how they would end the movie because a lot of it revolved around the interview not with Ramona, and so to like end it with her I thought was probably a good choice because the movie didn't start with her. It was more of, I forgot the name of who Constance Wood plays, but her character Destiny, yeah. It was more of like through her eyes at the beginning, and it was kind of actually through her eyes in perspective of the whole movie. And then at the end, it decided to go through Ramona, who was kind of actually the linchpin for the movie and who was the person who kind of dictated where the plot would go. So I thought that was
because it goes through Destiny's like eyes, the whole story, and the story has to kind of go on this track where she hits those highs and then the low happens, And the low part is probably when they broke up and then and then her grandma died. I feel like right before her grandma died, they had a really cool type of relationship going on between the grandma and Jennifer Lopez. And they were doing that kind of like back and forth. And I wish that happened a little bit longer so I would feel sadder when the grandma died. I just felt like it was sad in the way it kind of came in. The timing was wrong, but I felt like we weren't kind of let into that enough. You know what I mean? Like obviously she was trying to help her grandma the whole movie, pay off her house and keep her out of debt. But just that interaction wasn't the same. I just felt like I didn't have that same emotional pull as I did when the band kind of broke up and then they reunited again.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think what's it called? A lot of just the overall like I don't know what to call it. Like just the look of the movie, not like the cinematography or anything, just the look of the movie. It felt like something that I thought was important to have in this movie, if that makes sense. Like I thought the colors in general and just everything in the movie, like it fit the movie and what the movie was going for. And I thought what was interesting too is that it was like in the mid 2000s and like, went into the early 2010s. And like
they had the iPhone 4.
Yeah, seeing things stuff, like that was funny. Seeing Usher, I think he actually showed up for it.
And the throwback songs and stuff throughout the whole thing.
I thought that was important to like whenever you're making a movie like on a time period that's not current, you need to kind of make sure that there's always those marking points in which your audience knows where you're at, so they don't always get confused, even if you're saying the years.
And also, I think it kind of gave that a little bit of a nostalgic feel to it in a way because the people who were around during, and I mean obviously I was too, but during the financial crisis, I feel like it was kind of important to give you that lead up so you kind of feel more connected to Ramona and why she's doing what she's doing. And that's why it's called Hustlers and not like Criminals or something like that, because you want to feel connected to the protagonist. You don't want to be like, oh, she's a bad guy. You know what I mean? So what is?
Nothing. Yeah, I do agree. I think like a lot of movies now are looking at that on a more like critical level and like how that affected America. And you know, this is one of those movies. So I think that's cool that more movies are acknowledging that, which is a big part in like, you know, America's economy. And yeah, just overall, I'd just say it was a pretty good movie. I like the final line, which is like the whole country's a strip club and there's people throwing the dollars, there's people dancing. I thought that was an interesting perspective, and it was a good final line. And yeah, overall, I just thought it was a pretty fun movie. It never like took itself like too seriously because it kind of knew the crimes were a little weird and obscure, but it also like didn't make a joke out of anything. And like the main cast was pretty likable, and they all did a pretty good job. So
I agree with what you said though. Before we give the numbers in, I just want to, from a technical aspect, about the color palette from the strip club to the stuff with the like the diners or the dinners. But I wasn't such a big fan of the framing of some of the shots, just because I felt like it could have been done better. Like too much of it was too center in a way that it just didn't really work for me. And to quote Randy Jackson, not our uncle, but you know, it's not working for me, dog. It's not.
Interesting.
Yeah. You know, but the color palette and the cinematography, for the most part, I really did like it.
Yeah, no, it was pretty good. And there was like, we were talking about the opening tracking shot, which is probably the best shot in the movie to me. And then that time where the sound went off, and there was like one other thing. I think those little tricks are hard to come by in movies nowadays because pretty much every type of shot you can think of and every little thing has been done at some point. So to see stuff like that is just cool, you know, for an audience member who likes movies. Like, oh, okay, you know, you're switching it up somehow.
Did I go deaf, dude? I wish I heard that.
Oh
that
man, it was great. It was classic. I was like, we have to put that in.
I don't know if he actually meant that though. I feel like he was
but like when it goes quiet and the whole theater's quiet, and then all of a sudden you hear somebody go, he was
an older man though. Let's be honest.
Oh, okay. I didn't know who it was.
Yeah, he was an older man. So if he was a young kid, I would have been like, okay, he's joking.
I missed out.
Yeah. But yeah, I'd give this movie a 7.5.
All right.
Yeah.
I would give it, from my perspective, I would give it a 7.5 with BG, because I also don't want to bag on this movie too much. It's really not a movie that I would watch.
Yeah, it's not really male oriented.
It isn't. But I think if you are a female or, you know, a woman and you want to go see a movie with your friends, I would from that perspective, I would probably give it an 8.5, because I've seen a few chick flicks, you know what I mean? And there are some solid ones, and there's not some solid ones.
I think
this is a pretty good chick flick, and I would give it like an 8.5 as a chick flick, but, you know, trying to exclude my bias.
Yeah, it's not a movie like, if I had to watch this movie again, I wouldn't dread it. Like, I wouldn't be like, oh, I can't watch the movie again. Like, I'd still like enjoy it. But it's not a movie, you know, I'll go out of my way to see. So I
agree.
I would give it an 8, just because the cast was solid. I think for a female audience, it would be a great movie to see.
Definitely.
Like, I definitely know that they would connect with it, just going through the journey of what it is to be a woman. You know, which I can't identify with, but I know that there's a lot of truth in there. It was directed by a female director as well. So
and written.
Yeah, and written. And so
crazy.
It's definitely for me, and her name's I think Lorraine or
Lauren.
Starts with the L.
Yeah. I don't want to say it wrong. So, but for me, I definitely would give it an 8, and I think I'm happy I saw it.
I also, going back to the music, you know, final thoughts. I like the music choice. I thought it was not just a throwback, but it was those throwback songs that definitely you were dancing in the club if that was you, or it was like it just reminded me of the songs that, you know, a lot of females would get together and women would like party with each other to that song.
Yeah.
So I feel like they definitely did a good job knowing their audience, targeting that audience, and because everybody in the theater, for me, they were loving it.
Oh, yeah.
Lost their mind. They were dancing. People were singing along to the songs. I'm serious. When Usher came in, people lost it. I thought it was funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess Usher makes people dance in the theater.
Yeah. What's your name? Usher, baby.
Yeah.
That was funny, man.
Well, you know, the one thing is music does set the tone, and you know, there's a certain song that played in the beginning and a certain song that the movie ended with as well, and so it brought me back because I know that decade very well. So.
It's like the only decade I know, to tell you the truth.
All right.
Well, thank you guys for tuning in. Don't forget to leave a comment. Tell us what you thought about this movie. Maybe any other movies that you think are similar to it. And what other movies you would like us to see. You know, like, comment, and subscribe, man. We'll see you next.